also thanks to the people in this room and the people and you yourselves there, because this been a journey for me, and each and every one has played such an important part in the process. And I really thank Dr. Clem, going back to my seminary days and mission, giving me a unique perspective on mission. And now in this time serving in this role. And also Larry, been such an encouragement in my mission days in Thailand, and came to get me started on this whole thesis paper back when I was in a completely different context. And you stuck with me, and and I appreciate your helping me, giving your input in this stage now. And also for my whole team, my family, and all the people in this room, Wally, Pastor Albert, made my adjustment here. So just very, very much a blessing, and I appreciate all your wisdom and insight with me. So we're on a journey together, and this title of this presentation is An Appreciative Inquiry Approach to Congregational Change Toward a Missional Multi-Ethnic Church. And what attracted me to Bethany really was the vision statement that the church is committed to, and that they're familiar with it very well. It's, we will demonstrate the reconciling work of God by continuing to become a cross-cultural, multi-ethnic community of believers, reaching people for Jesus Christ and becoming committed followers of Him. So an emphasis on becoming a multi-ethnic community that's reaching out, making a difference for Christ. That was in 2001. And in 2011, they adopted this mission statement, or another form of vision statement or mission statement, to equip people to follow Christ, connect with cultures, and invest in our community. So embracing those same themes. When I came to Bethany, my first thought was I really embrace the vision and the mission. And so rather than trying to create something new, found it much more worthwhile to help continue with the church in the pursuit of this. And so the word connect, how do we connect with cultures? That's really the beginning of this project, asking the question, what are the best ways we connect with people of other cultures within our church, within the community, within other ethnic churches? And that was the question that we pursued. So the statement, I'm just going to run through, these are just kind of highlights of the various chapters of this thesis. But the statement of the problem, basically, the problem or challenge we were facing here was declining attendance over the last few decades, needing to revitalize the church. But the dominant concerns in this thesis are actually the strong dominant culture pervading of the church, so that while it has many internationals, still needing further transformation to be truly multicultural in its ways of doing things and worship and leadership. So continued growth in that area. And then had become somewhat inward focused, focusing on institutional survival just to keep going. But in that, a lot of our resources and time kind of focused on the things that we do here. So that was the statement of the problem. And the purpose in this thesis was to implement a strategy for congregational change that engages the people of Bethany, its church partners, and community members in participating in a participatory process of appreciative inquiry toward becoming a missional, multi-ethnic church. So it's really about not just laying out some strategies, but a method or the process. How do people go through change? How can an organization change? And using appreciative inquiry as a method. So the next thing, I want to then just go through the foundational background things, which are the context of the project, the literature review, and the biblical and theological foundations. So in terms of the context of the project, the main context of the project is Bethany Baptist Church, a church that's 111 years old, 113 years old. So over a century years old. And I found one of the most fascinating things of this whole thing was going back and reading through original documents and early history of the church. and various and two other pastors who had doctoral theses that I could study from. And when I looked at the whole story and as it relates to this project, I could see I wanted to identify three different parts of that history of the church. And the first really is as a Swedish immigrants. So in 1900, when they came, the church really started in many ways from a missional community, a group of Swedish immigrants who are all I presume all at least bilingual, bicultural, because they identified as Swedes, but they were in a minority group, and they met together, and the impetus of the church began because they were doing work with children in the community and started a Sunday school, which at that time would also have a very important educational component in the history of the Sunday schools at that time. And so you have this beginning church. When I look at the different periods, I primarily focus on what's their cultural identity and what's their intercultural relationships. So as a Swedish church, they preserved their Swedish identity, and yet they found ways to interact and to partner with other groups, like parent groups, like the American Baptists, and in their work. So a lot of very fascinating, interesting things of this early age of a church of immigrants and poor immigrants. Poor in the sense of the Adolf Olson, he talks about the places where they were living being like squatter communities, where they just built their own homes on unsettled land. And some of them got to work in the homes of the privileged or the people of means, was his words. So you get a picture of a working class immigrant church. And then the next phase in this long history is the suburban white church. So the church moved from downtown to this first ring suburb of Roseville in the 1950s. And so during the 1950s and 60s into the 70s, this church was at its peak in terms of membership and social status, and very close relationship to the seminary that was nearby. And it just matches the story of what's happening in U.S. cities with the movement of people, primarily white families, moving out from downtown in the city out into the suburbs. And so in the 1970s, at the peak, this church had lost its identity as a Swedish church, and now, although they would not use the term being a white church, it is an all-white church in an all-white neighborhood. And in fact, I found it interesting, this picture is of Norm Anderson, the pastor in the late mid-70s, and in his doctoral thesis, he says, we don't have to worry about race, in terms of outreach, we don't have to worry about racial issues of cross-racial ministry, because as he pointed out, less than 1%, way less than 1% of Roseville were people of color. It was an entirely white community, all speaking English, and there was no intercultural kind of issues they dealt with. Well, in the last segment of this early history was the forming of a multi-ethnic vision under Bruce Peterson, and it took time to form and develop, but through partnerships with ethnic churches, a Korean church, then a Filipino church that came in the early 90s, stayed for 13 years. And that, in 2001, that's where the vision that I just read a little bit ago, that is where that was born. And during that time, they really saw a lot of growth and change in that almost 20% of the church is now people of color, or internationals, people from born outside of the U.S. And so many positive things that did happen during that time. And at the same time, as I pointed out, some of the dominant culture aspects of the church still make it difficult for there to be full expression of different cultures. I think one thing that we struggle with is we have in that vision statement to become demonstrate the reconciling work of God, which really is talking about racial reconciliation and reconciliation between groups. But now, 20 years into that vision, we still have not had one African American member, and that's also just something that's a real challenge in the church. So in other words, moving in that direction. One of the most fascinating things I found in this period was in 2005, those who are in the church will recognize the parallels and that's the time when Pastor Albert was called as a pastor, and the Filipino church that was here for 13 years was in the process of considering a merger. And out of that, there were many lessons that were learned. Well, in terms of the overall context, you see from Roseville's population that they really grew, the entire city grew between 1950 and 1970 and then plateaued. And look at the ethnic diversity as it grows after 1990, as it grows up to the 70, today, 27% in terms of non-white or people of color. So very rapidly changing demographic. And the Twin Cities itself, this is from John Mayer from the Merge Ministries, but he's a statistician. He keeps track of immigrant groups here, and just noting the ways in which the Twin Cities is truly a gateway for immigrant communities, with many populations having one of the largest representations here in the Twin Cities. So all of that gives a great context for creating a multi-ethnic church, a missional church. In terms of literature, I won't say too much about this, but the three categories I studied were in appreciative inquiry, becoming a multi-ethnic church, and becoming a missional church. For appreciative inquiry, a lot of the books are very, very parallel in establishing the basic principles and assumptions of appreciative inquiry. It very much builds on the positive psychology and social construction of how organizations develop an image, a picture, a goal, and how they change. Some of these principles are the sense that as soon as you begin to ask a question, you already have created a focus. And if the focus is positive, you will have more chance of moving toward a positive outcome. As you anticipate positive things, it creates positive energy for the organization to overcome the challenges of bringing about change. So that's kind of the underlying, a lot of the books, they talk about the underlying principles of appreciative inquiry. But it's very much a method, a process of these 4 Ds. This is the most common way it's expressed: discovery, beginning before it begins with defining what you're studying. Then these 4 Ds, which will come out when I talk about the methods that we used here, the design. Just some of the, I'll just kind of skip over these, but some of the key books that I found myself going back to over and over again, in that process. In terms of the literature on intercultural things, I think the most helpful books are the ones that dealt with overcoming, that had to deal with reconciliation, like this book by Ra on cultural intelligence for a changing church, really dealing with the issue of racial reconciliation within a multi-ethnic context. And Mark Lowell Branson was very helpful because he himself did appreciative inquiry in a Japanese American church in California. And he walks you through that. And this book was on how they dealt with culture and issues of understanding theology and culture within the church. And within here at Bethany, we're most familiar with this book by D.Y. Mass. That's on models, a more practical book on doing multi-ethnic churches. And in the realm of missional literature, probably this was the most helpful in introducing that. And I'll be talking about that some in the theology. So the biblical theology and foundations I used were primarily focusing on the intersection of 3 things: the missional God, God's mission field, that is the world, and the missional church. In thinking about missional God, the emphasis was in when we say missional, what is primarily emphasizing is the sense that God is on mission, God is active and working His Spirit is working in the world, and we need to join in with him. So he's a God who created diversity. He's a God who incarnated himself on mission. He himself in his being, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is community of diversity. And all of that is an expression of the mission and the world that God has created and made. And it's his mission. I was most intrigued by the statement, the difference between the Church of God has a mission versus the God of mission has a church. And the God of mission has a church is what this missional concept is. The world that is that we are involved in this mission is one that is broken, it's shattered, but God loves it, it's redeeming it. And so the role of the church is to enter in, remember that we're part of the world, part of being used as instruments in God's mission as a spirit-filled and a sent servant of God to incarnate ourselves in the world. But one of the things in the missional church is being a sign and a prophetic foretaste. And so being a multi-ethnic church really brings out the essence of which this is more than just a way to grow a church, but this is a reflection of God's ultimate mission. In terms of the project design, it's just following through the work that we did here. It was in 2016 and 17, and it followed through the basic practice and method of appreciative inquiry. So we began by defining what are we going to study, and I chose the Connect theme because Connect was part of the mission statement that the church had already committed to. And it began by in the beginning of 2016, introducing this project to the leaders in the church and recruiting a team of 8 leaders, 8 people who would help on the guide team. They included elders and a diversity of both of cultural diversity that was represented, and also diversity of men and women. And they became the guide team that helped think through all of the questions we would ask and interpret the things that we found. We had a training day with Dr. Loeb Baki, who came from BGU, and he helped launch our Connect project, Appreciative Inquiry project. The discovery phase was we developed the interview guide, which is in one of the first appendixes in the back, that basically developed the questions that we would ask within our small groups, and then meeting with small group leaders and then conducting the interviews. The interviews are basically looking at 6 different areas, trying to determine from our experience, not from our opinions or ideas, but from our experience, how did we best connect? What were the key experiences that we had when we connected to Bethany? And what were the best experiences of connecting with people of other cultures within Bethany and with people of other cultures outside of Bethany? And then reflecting on that. So what do we value? What does that say about what we value in our relationships? And what are our key strengths to help us connect with others? In this kind of interview, it's not a survey. It's not going through and checking A, B, C, or D, but it's wanting to elicit stories from people and experience, and have them reflect on those stories in the ways and the things that they're learning from. So we did that we had about 50 interviews that were conducted through our small groups, and then followed up with other people who weren't part of small groups. And this culminated in April when we had what we called the Dream Day, or the Dream Event, and we gathered about 60 people gathered after church that day. And we shared with them the results of the interviews, and then had them use stickers to go around and show what was most significant out of the various responses, which ones were most significant to them. And then, kind of a strange thing for our church, but we had some closer eyes. We read a little bit from Isaiah 65 about imagining, God's the church of our hope and dreams. How would that look? And read back to them some of the things that they had stated as their main values that they valued in the church. And so out of that, they then drew up pictures and then shared those pictures on the table, came up with pictures that expressed the image best for them, and then were to write propositional statements, bold statements of describing what does that church look like? in a present tense form. So here's just one example of one that's now a poster in the office here, but of a picture that was expressing something of, diversity of people gathered around a central focus, and the statement that they had on the bottom. That's an example of the kind of things that came out of that day. Well, from that dream day, then our guide team went and evaluated the various, we looked at the pictures and the bold statements and tried to find themes in that. And out of that, basically we took the dream, put it on the right side of the page, and said, oh, we're on the left side. So what are the various things that are coming out in the dream that are areas that we would need to work on, and how can we design that for change? And we came out of that, what was presented to the elders and the council was 5 areas of wanting to design change. The very first one was physical improvements to create a place to connect that was more attractive, inviting, and expressed our intercultural vision. The second was intentional diversity in worship and leadership, including with immigrant churches. 3, increased engagement in community. 4, development of youth and children to connect with community and increasing diversity. And then 5, relationship building activities for connecting with people within the church. They don't want to just go to meetings, but wanted more community, informal times together. So those were the areas that we needed to design. We couldn't do them all at once. So out of the delivery, and the last stage, the delivery, talks about the things that we worked on. And the main ones that we've worked on since then have been the physical improvements and areas of dealing with youth and with the worship leadership. So the last stage of delivery is taking actions on those plans, and then also incorporating a culture of ongoing appreciative initiatives of creating change through connecting people, having conversations, thinking positive, making dreams, and then designing how do we make that happen. So the outcomes and results in these last 2 years in doing this project, in terms of measuring it, I wanted to measure it by, in terms of the measurable change, quantitative increase in diversity. This is hard to measure, and when we have a small church, even a change in a few people or situations can change. But basically what you can see from this chart from December 15th to December 7th, 2017, in terms of church members, that's a formal category, and we really haven't much change of members one way or the other. But in terms of leadership roles, you'll notice that we've had an increase of diversity in leadership roles to now being 30% and 70%. When it says largest ethnic group, that means which group that has the largest number, percentage of that identify with that ethnic group. So you'll see from this that the greatest change was in the last 2 categories, was the involvement on our worship team and the youth group. A little bit of explanation for worship team. Some of the changes we brought about there were intentionally looking for people that would bring diversity into the worship team, and we're currently using a rotating schedule, and with people that do bring a level of ethnic diversity in leading us in worship. And the youth group changed radically, mostly because the youth group that was there grew up and became young adults, and we started a new youth group. But the young adult group really represents what the church was 10 or 15 years ago, because they grew up in the church and now they're the young adults. Whereas the new group coming in and the new youth group is more reflective of newer people in the church to some degree. And you'll notice that the new youth group is extremely a diverse group. In fact, it's not a very large group, so the sampling is very small. But there are not 2 individuals in that group that have the same ethnic makeup or identity. Very diverse group of young people. And we've since then have also combined our youth with the predominant Filipino American church to add to that the strength of that group. So the kinds of things that I can observe to see change is, in when we're going about the interior design, effort was made to want to make it be attractive in a more international or African style in our coffee area. Those here know what I'm talking about. We've continued to explore our relationships with ethnic churches within our building, and currently are having once a month worship with the Filipino church here, and meeting weekly with their pastors. And as I said, we've made some changes in our worship style to create a more multiple leadership that represent the diversity as we come and worship together. And in terms of missional engagement, I won't say much on this as we're for time here, but that was a much more that's a much more challenging thing, because it's not just changing things within, but it's needing to engage with people outside, building relationships, and changing the whole time schedule and rhythm of the church to be able to and our attitude in joining in with the community. But we have had these areas of seeking to grow in that way. Establish a theological framework refers to a one-year program we did from Region called Reframe. It was basically setting a theological framework for understanding God's kingdom work and how our work relates to it. We did experiments in community engagement. Means somebody wanted to rake leaves to go show that God's love will rake leaves. But as we put that out in the neighborhood, it was more our church is leading this, and if people want to join in and help rake leaves. So it's just changing kind of the doing with rather than always doing for. And finally, community conversations on race. We feel that's such an important thing for a multi-ethnic church. And so over the last year, we've had book study, book group, and trying to promote opportunities for people to understand about racial reconciliation and issues in our community. And we hope the desire is to see this changing within our culture. So when we have meetings, when we're trying to plan things, of trying to use those appreciative questions as a way and for new initiatives to be focused on doing it in an appreciative style. As I kind of conclude with conclusions and implications, I think for me personally, this has just been kind of transforming. In my ministry in the past, I've been very much like, what's broken, have to fix it. Very much wanting to kind of control things and in the sense of fixing things. But this is taught the sense of looking at an organization, a church, as a living system, and needing changes in something you can impart on others, but it is through people being connected, engaged, and creatively contributing to a new reality. And just the whole value of stories, the importance of a positive focus to create the kind of energy that allows people to overcome their resistance to change, how important diversity is in strengthening who we're becoming. And then the last thing, this last 5, I said, the leader's role is not to make change or impose change on others. Rather, the leader facilitates connections and conversations that capture creative vision and passion of a group, like a surfer riding a wave that is bigger than himself. So more about facilitating change. And we do, as we go forward, there are a number of things that we could use appreciative inquiry approach if we're going to seek to bring about change, both on ongoing work on the worship team, and if we were to do some kind of merger, it would be very good to do it in this kind of appreciative approach. If I could conclude in terms of how this applies to change, particularly in multi-ethnic churches, I would say the big questions always are, what questions are being asked? Who is being asked to speak from their experience? Who contributed in forming the vision? And who is at the table when the designs are made? The basic thesis and lesson out of this whole project was, it's only when, if we're looking to become a more diverse church, It's only when we bring all those voices into the process and they become co-creators with us that it truly will take on that ownership. I think two verses that just kind of speak to the heart of this project are one from Philippians 4:8, of keeping our focus on that which is noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, anything that's excellent or praiseworthy, to think on those things. And as Paul said, this ongoing process, I always pray for you with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. That sense that it's not us, it's God at work in us, through us, and he will carry it on. So thank you. That's my project presentation, an overview of the various components.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Very, very well done. Appreciate you bringing that all together and some really nice graphics, too, to help us kind of picture what's going on here. Well, let's take a little time now and kind of discuss just a lot of input from Kevin. Let's see if we can kind of dissect it a little bit and look at different parts of this project. What do you want to ask in terms of questions, clarification, etc.? I'll be quiet for just a little bit and let you guys kind of jump in, if you will.
I would like to ask Wally how he perceived the enthusiasm of the church for this change process that Kevin has initiated.
Good question. Gotta think about that for a second. That's a really good question.
What do you think it is, Kevin? How much enthusiasm do you perceive from the church for the change process?
Well, I think that really strong thing is long before I ever came, they already had the vision and the statement and the desire to see these changes. I think I'm always impressed at how the church continues to affirm the vision and those things. I think in the process of working it out, people are starting to realize that, well, actually a multi-ethnic church doesn't mean that we invite people from, different cultures to come join us in what we do. But when it starts to mean sharing power, changing formats, changing things that make us uncomfortable, that's, that process, some of the, that starts to give clarity to what people were anticipating or what they thought they were on board for.
Yeah, there's several things that I could probably talk about. I think that the word enthusiasm, I think, there is an enthusiasm, but as much as that, there is an expectation. And I can see that kind of beginning to permeate its way up, the expectation that we will work more together in an organic fashion, in a multi-ethnic sort of intercultural fashion. Yeah, I think more and more people are beginning to get it and understand what it means to really operate in an intercultural context, and therefore are expecting the things that Kevin is beginning to, for example, the worship team. If we suddenly turned into a white worship team again, that would be anathema, because the expectation is that we're beginning more and more of an organic unit and context that works together very well and really feeds off of this new sort of context of interculturalness. And so to have a worship team that's all white is something that people actually comment on and say, why? Because we're not used to this anymore. We're beginning to see the changes and expect that these things are incorporated constantly and always, into our into our experience here.
Thank you. That's very affirming for us to hear about as a feedback, because of the potential for easy buy-in without perceiving what would actually be required, or the bumps along the way.
Really good question.
I just offer a comment.
Yes.
I think when you bring about change in an organization like a church, with our 100-year history, there's often a lot of fear about the change, and particularly there's a lot of anticipation of loss when there's change and the need to grieve that loss. But with appreciative inquiry, it's very overt. You really elicit those things which are positive in the church, the spirit of the church, the way that God has led in historical past. So it's very obvious for everyone to see that the very best of our past is moving with us into the future. And that in other places where I've been, where there's change, the loss is much more obvious. In this case, the gain and the affirmation of the good things, even while we're undergoing change, it kind of sets everything on its head.
Yeah, that's I think especially as people tell their stories and they're connecting back to good, positive memories, they got involved.
Let me say one more thing, if that's okay. There's an example here that I see the use of this appreciative inquiry, for lack of a better term. It's a great term. We're going through a remodel program right now, and one of the things that we're going to do is to lose our library, for lack of a better term. And we've got this library that has many books in it that has gone out of use. It's not used nearly as much as it used to. And so as a remodel team, we've been looking at how to do that. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Kevin's approach to this was that, yes, we probably need to remodel into the library, and in a sense, lose much, if not all of the library. But the process of doing that is going to make it either successful or not in terms of how people perceive the rest of the project. And so Kevin's approach was to begin the conversation with those who are most interested in keeping the library, but also expressing a certain grief for losing that library also. And that was something, Kevin, when you mentioned that back a few weeks ago, I just thought, wow, that is a really good way of not only making progress into something that we believe is necessary, but also appreciating what has been in the past and how important it has been, and how important it is to recognize that and to recognize those who put time and effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very practical outcome of this work that he's doing.
Can we just jump in here?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say, Kevin, you've done an excellent job. Even your overview this evening was excellent. A question that I had, and you touch upon this in your dissertation, talking about the fact that only a few members live within a mile radius of the church. Okay? To me, that seems significant. You didn't really talk about that much in your project, but what do you think that means in some of the things that you've outlined? This is the steps forward that the church has to take in light of that. So that's one part of my question. The second part of the question is, in your appreciative inquiry, you had all sorts of groups that were being polled and asked questions of, but I didn't see much from the community itself. If you ask them, what do you want from us as a church in your community? Did that happen at all? Or if it did or didn't, what do you think the community would say? What do they want Bethany to do?
Yeah. So as relates to the very first question about who is our community and trying to define that. So for this church, we have intentionally tried not to think, when we say our community, to not think just merely of the immediate blocks right around the church, which is changing. In fact, we just had well, I won't go into that, but anyway, it is changing, but still it's we're kind of boxed in. The thing about this location is it's a great regional spot because people can come from all over the Twin Cities to this central thing right off the freeway. But the immediate neighborhood is kind of blocked in by state fairgrounds and the golf course and the freeway. So it's not, if we were to make that our one and only focus, it would be short-sighted. But one of the ways in dealing with that is to help people understand the church scattered. So understanding theology of work, understanding that in their various communities. And I mean, so we talk about communities, we could mean work community. We could talk about ethnic communities in the Twin Cities. So there's lots of different ways of thinking in community, and it's trying to help people see that church isn't just what we do here in the building for the neighbors, but it's what we're doing out in all these various communities. And actually, as a multi-ethnic church, this church is great because, like for the Filipino church or the Haitian church, they have members scattered all over the Twin Cities, but they all connect here because it's so convenient. And the second question about that, asking the people in the neighborhood, is excellent. And as we move forward in wanting to do more mission, I said that we kind of focus on some of the multi-ethnic aspects, but we didn't really haven't gotten engaged in the missional aspect. But I think as we do that, that's got to be number one, is not just having a meeting where we come up with a plan how we're going to serve the community, but how do we go out, listen to people in the community already doing things, partnering with them, and knowing what our neighbors will be doing. I do think that, like, for example, in the one example of what you're talking about is like in the area of, say, interracial reconciliation. That's the one topic where, as a church, if we were to, as we would host something on that topic, that's something that lots of people in our communities are interested in. And so it doesn't become something that, like, we're just doing to give the answer to the community, but it's inviting the community to have dialogue within the context of our community here. So we definitely need to grow in that area.
Thank you.
Kevin, just a general question. As you've been working through this process for the last year or two, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to face as you work through these issues? I know as AI, we try to really emphasize the positive, but what are some of the challenges that you've had to wrestle through? I mean, the really difficult ones.
Yeah. No need to leave the room. I would say the number one challenge for us is, I'll just call it the spinning wheels, or the, how can I say, the amount of time and energy that has to go into making Sunday morning happen. This committee needs to meet, this committee needs to meet. And the amount of energy that goes into a small church like this just to do the routine things is a lot. And so these kind of appreciative kind of inquiry things require put a hold on the boxes we have, put a hold on the structures we have. Let's just lay all that aside, lay the time aside, come together and dream together and create something new and fresh. And I'd say the biggest challenge is the structures we have and the commitments people have to be faithful to those, and the time constraints that make it very difficult to carve out time to be able to do that. So that's one thing. I would say another challenge maybe is that the realization that if we try to change three major things at the same time, that nothing will change. And so being content to just have one or at most two things that we're really working on at one time, and it will, may take more time. So, that's another challenge, is narrowing down them with limited time and energy to focus on change. What is the most strategic things to be focused on at this time?
That's good. Yeah. Yeah, like you've already said, sometimes the things that we consider important get in the way of the really important. Yeah. And it's just, I'm going to date myself, but there was a book written back in the 70s when I was pastoring. We actually tried to put some of the principles into work. It was called Hang Loose, Brethren. And the whole point of it was we had so many structures and infrastructures in the church that were getting in the way of being the church. And, that whole book was just on that whole issue of trying to look at everything we do very intentionally and say, okay, what does this accomplish? What exactly do we want to be accomplishing? And is this really necessary? When you talk about all the timekeeping issues that get in the way of connecting, for example. Yeah, so I can relate to some of the issues that you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think on the level of multi-ethnic change or intercultural competence change, I think the greatest challenge there is the main things that have to change are the things people are blind to. So they feel like they got it, but maybe then, so how do you help open eyes? And that's where I think only through interaction and conversation and listening and hearing each other, then, we hope to be able to, in a spirit of freedom, be able to hear and see other perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Could I ask another question?
Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah. This is kind of a weird question. Maybe I'm just going to put on my Converge mission hat here.
Yeah.
How did your 20 plus years in Bangkok influence how you approached your project and how you even approach your ministry in the church now? Because that's had to have some effect. I know that wasn't a part of what you're trying to write about. I'm just curious, as you reflect back, how did that impact you now in your church?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. Actually, I remember when I talked to Lowell and told him I was moving back to the States, and I was thinking, this is kind of hopeless, or, like it's too big a change. He was the first to kind of point out and show me the principles and process and the things I was doing there can apply here. Name what I was doing in Bangkok, and my original thesis that you saw the proposal for was how to help middle-class Thai churches to use appreciative inquiry approach to helping to develop and work in poor communities. And the thing they had to get over there was not so much, wasn't things about racism or that kind of, but it was another sort of paternalism of the Bangkokian middle-class church looking down on the folks in the community and wanting to go in and, help all their problems. So, it was about, that work in Thailand was about the church needing to go into communities and learn from the communities and see the values and strengths of the community and come alongside and engage and partner with them in doing things that are working towards shalom. And in a similar way here, I feel like the church sometimes has a downward-looking view of the community and goes out in the community to tell them maybe where they're wrong or to, want to share with them good news, which is part of the what we do, I'm not saying that. But in coming here, it was how do we as a church use those same processes to go and to listen and learn to appreciate differences, learn to appreciate things in our community, engage in our community in ways that are more partnering and relationship building, finding the strengths in the community rather than just only going with a view that, in a more messianic, like we're there to save our community. So some of those things, especially as we get maybe into the more missional ways of trying to become more missional as a church, I think that those will come out more strongly then.
Great, thank you.
Those were good years. Converge. These are better years. These are good years too. I miss Neeson, sorry. Yeah.
Kevin, another question I've been asking students. As you come through the process of doing research, we kind of think of ourselves as a school of practitioners, but we're really trying to, be scholar practitioners. Coming through this process, just coming through BGU, can you just give me a little bit of a summary? What you think you've learned about research, and does research actually help you in your work? Is it practical? You've been kind of forced to go through a process, fairly disciplined process, and I always wonder how are the tools that you've maybe learned through that research process are going to help you as a pastor, as a whatever the Lord is asking you to do.
Yeah, I think even most recently in doing the technical review and having and the need to show documentation and show what that was based on, I think one of the things that helped me is like, you don't realize as you go through your life or your ministry, you have all these ideas and all these assumptions and things that you're thinking, your view and perspective on things, and you didn't always sit down and reflect on, why do I think that? Like, what is that actually based on? Is that my opinion that I thought, and then I bore it out in my, that was my experience, and maybe it just reinforced an opinion. So I think one thing was that it helped me to, in terms of the research aspect, it helped me to not just be satisfied with my own thoughts and conclusions and opinions that I had formed and just take for granted, but to be open to new concepts, new perspectives, new insights that others offer, but then also to be challenged as to, is that really true, what I think, or is it just something I formed an opinion on and doesn't really bear out in other people's experience, or is something of a personal bias. So I think that has forced the research aspect has forced me to be able to build almost like building blocks. What is this idea and this method that we're doing? What is the basis from that is based on as to its factualness? And so yeah, I think in this day and age, it's good to find truth and facts and things that have not just can't just totally social construct everything.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else have a question, a thought before we go into an evaluation session?
He's got one.
Yeah, here it comes.
Yeah.
Here it comes.
Well, as I read through the pieces, I really appreciate where you're coming from, and it actually made me really appreciate Pastor Bruce for things that he had to go through, even initiating his vision statement with the church and the challenges that he had to go. I really, there are a lot of things that really made me appreciate. And also, you've really made me appreciate, the heart in which you wrote this pieces is really challenging, and it touches my heart. But my question is, looking at what Pastor Bruce went through, and even before him, when changing from a Swedish Baptist church to an English congregation. And then looking at where we are now, moving in terms of maybe thinking along with merger, possibly merger with maybe Yuma Church.
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue that maybe I'm wrestling with that. One of the things that I saw in terms of the change that happened between Pastor Bruce and Yuka is something to do with I see in terms of leadership and how that will play in terms of maybe sometime in the future if Yuma and Bethany comes together. How would that play out? In terms of that relationship? Because, I mean, it could go on for a year, 2, 10 years, and somewhere along the line, leadership might change.
Yeah.
And how do you think the church will, move in that direction?
Yeah.
How are we going to be prepared for that change?
No, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your part in this whole story as well, and in helping think these things out. I just say, in terms of the thought of two churches merging together, I think that the appreciative approach of doing that through connections, conversations, dreaming together, and co-create. The key word is co-creating together, so that something that ends up in the end is different than either was when they started. It's really important to that process, particularly with two churches that neither one is significantly 10 times larger or something, but coming together. So I think for it to work, it takes you can't just do it by organizationally figuring out those kind of organizational questions, but at the heart level, how do you create a common vision and common values that comes only through the personal connections and hearing each other's stories and forming that together. But I think there are definite lessons. That's why I'm so intrigued by that 10 years with the faith FACC, with the Filipino American Christian Church. It's like it's like deja vu, and here we are, and it's like, okay, we want to pursue this and know God's will in it before 13 years, in the right amount of time, or where God is leading in all of that. But I think in answer to that first question about, or that point you were saying about leadership, so I think in these kinds of settings, one of the most important things within leadership in both churches is humility and flexibility, because anytime it turns into any kind of power struggle or rigidness of needing to hold on to certain forms or structures, that's going to make it very challenging. But I think to the degree that as a church we come alongside and are able to see not the structures and the forms, but one God and the vision of the church that He designed for us, and in that humility that it offers the best chance. But in any situation, even in the case of this church, we need to pursue God's will. Maybe it's not God's will in this particular church match. Maybe God's, that's the discernment process. So I don't think it's anything that can be forced, or it will either happen through the process, or it'll become clear that God's not leading in that direction, and that's good then not to do it.
All right. With that, we are going to need to go into a little evaluation session. I need to have Dr. Herb Clem at the microphone. I actually need you, Kevin, to kind of be out of the room for a while so we can talk about you.
And I will invite folks back.
Okay.
And that would be the way. Yeah, if you could kind of be the moderator there, Herb, that'd be great.
And where will you be? You'll be out that way? All right, next room, next door. Very good. Catch you later. Bill, I assume you have the form.
Yeah, can you actually see that form on the screen?
Yes.
What?
Okay, yeah, I've taken some notes as we've been going along, so we'll just kind of work through this form. Okay.
And
Okay,
it didn't blow up the church. That's good.
that is very good. All right. Well, if we're comfortable with that, we're going to bring, you can bring the rest of the group back in.
Very good.
Clem. And let's see, I'll stop sharing. Where are you located, Larry?
Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Okay, yeah. Not too far from me. I'm over here in Idaho.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where in Idaho?
We're about 45 miles south of Coeur d'Alene. Yeah,
Okay.
we're down in a very rural area now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we moved out of the Seattle area it's been about 10 years ago now.
Okay.
We
They
live
were-
in this area.
Wondering why we took so long.
Well, you know, when there's bad dissertations, it takes a long time.
That's right. That's right.
We're still telling the bad news.
You'd think the bad ones would be easy.
Okay. We all back?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, we have the privilege now of addressing you as Dr. Kevin Walton. We just want to praise you and praise the Lord for your work.
Yay! Finally!
Finally, yeah. Kevin, we actually gave you not just a pass, but a high pass, because we felt like you've just done some very amazing work there. And you've gone through some transformation yourself, and you're putting in place some processes, we believe, that just have the potential for bringing about some amazing transformation. And so we just applaud you and congratulate you for the work that you're doing there. So others can kind of give their words, their thoughts.
Well, just echo what Bill said. You did a great job, and look forward to great things happening at the church now.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Amen.
Amen. Well, I just thank again everyone here, and I thank you for your input and this to be able to celebrate together. So thank you so much, and again for the patience all the way through the whole process. So.
Mm.
And special thanks to my wife. Displayed the greatest, this is the most comfort for her. It's finished.
It's a bigger.
There's been blood on the floor.
Boy, for sure. It's just so good to have your team there, the people you're working with, just right there with you. It just kind of really speaks volumes about, the community that you're pulling together there. And, just at least what I've known, what I've heard, this church is really kind of being brought through a whole transformational process that it's going to take some pretty special leadership to make that happen. So I think God has the right man at the right place at the right time.
Thank you so much.
Amen. All right. With that, I think we're going to close down the session. We're just about out of our time. And I just appreciate all of you making the time to join in this time with Kevin and the rest of us. And so Kevin will be sending this form over to the school. What you need to do, just make sure that your dissertation is exactly where you want it. You have your approval from Larry, from Dr. Herb Clem, and you've got my approval. So basically, you're going to just send that project over to Dr. Judy Melton, and she'll kind of go through it just to make sure everything's good in terms of formatting before she starts sending it off to a bindery. Okay.
Okay.
But basically, you've jumped through all the hoops and you're ready for graduation.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to say good night and blessings on you and the Lord, and just keep on doing the good work you're doing.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye, Larry.
Bye-bye.
Hey, we'll
Good
see
to see you
you.
again, Larry.
Good to
Are
see
you
you.
in Falls right now, or where are you?
Pardon?
Where are you in Sioux Falls right now?
I'm in Sioux Falls. I'm in my office here at the seminary. So
Okay. We never know where in the world you might be, so you know.
yeah, no, Sioux Falls today. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Well, blessings.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night,
See you
all.
all.